Good morning. Today we look at Luke 19, verses 1 through 27, and it begins with the story of Zacchaeus. Jesus has entered Jericho. He's on his way to Jerusalem. This is shortly before his arrest and his crucifixion and everything. But he comes and it says he entered Jericho, and there was this man there named Zacchaeus, and we know him as this wee little man from a song we sang in Vacation Bible School many years ago for me, and probably you as well. But he was the chief tax collector. That means not only was he a tax collector, but he had several other tax collectors working under him. And he was disliked, hated maybe is a good word, but strongly disliked by the Jews because he was working for the Roman government. And anyone who was working for or with the Roman government was an enemy of the people, more or less. But Zacchaeus wanted to see Jesus. Didn't need to talk to him, just says he wanted to see him. So he ran ahead and he climbed up into this tree. And a sycamore tree is evidently an easy tree to climb. But he climbed up in this tree so that he would be able to see Jesus over the heads of all the other people. But when Jesus got there, he stopped. And he looked up into the tree and said, Zacchaeus, come down. I'm going to eat at your house today. And, of course, the people didn't like that because here's Jesus, with a sinner, And it wasn't just the Pharisees, the religious leaders that were kind of upset, but, all who saw it began to grumble. All. Because, this Zacchaeus was someone that they didn't like. Not worthy of Jesus, right? Well, is there anyone that's not worthy of Jesus? There isn't one of us that is unworthy. That is for sure. But he says, I'm going to be your guest. And he goes there. And Zacchaeus says, if I have defrauded anyone, I will pay them back 4 times. He's been honest in his dealings. And he says to Jesus that if I've caught dishonestly, I will repay 4 times. That's way more than would be required by the law. But, this is Zacchaeus, I am innocent. I have done my job for the Roman government. I have not cheated. I have not defrauded. But he's looked upon as by the others as being this horrible, horrible person. And Jesus looks upon him as a descendant of Abraham, deserving of God's love, deserving of God's grace, and welcome that way. And Jesus looks at Zacchaeus and says, today salvation has come to this house because he too is a son of Abraham. And then he says that the Son of Man, talking about himself, came to seek out and to save the lost. And of course he did. Jesus uses the parable of the lost sheep. And that's going to be one of the gospel lessons, during the month of May coming up. The Jesus, the Good Shepherd. And, but it's just, he comes for those of us who are outside of the law, because we all are, the sinners. And it says in verse 11, as they were listening to this, Jesus went on to tell a parable because he was near Jerusalem. And this is the parable of the man who goes to a distant country to get royal power for himself and then return. So what does it mean to go and get royal power for himself? He's probably going to marry the daughter or someone who is, a daughter-in-law, a niece of a foreign prince or king or something to draw more attention to himself, something to give himself more power. But I like that. It says, a nobleman went to a distant country to get royal power for himself. And he was a nobleman already. Again, somebody that's just looking for more power, more prestige, more whatever. But that's not important to Jesus' parable, really, because he summons 10 of his slaves and gives them 10 pounds and says, do business with these until I come back. But the citizens hated him and sent a delegation, we do not want this man to rule over us. When he returned, having received royal power, he ordered these slaves to whom he had given money to be summoned. And the first came and said, Lord, your pound has made 10 pounds. So this is, 1 pound he made 10 pounds. There are variations in this parable, different places. The second one said, Lord, your pound made 5 pounds. And the last one, Lord, I buried yours because I knew that you were a harsh and greedy man, and I wanted to make sure that you got your one back, that I didn't lose any of it. And, he said, I wrapped it in a piece of cloth, for I was afraid of you, because you are a harsh man. You take what you did not deposit, you reap what you did not sow. And Jesus judges him, and he tells them, you give this 1 pound to the man with 10. So the man with many, with all of that wealth, he gives more. And Jesus says, take that pound from him and give it to the one who has 10 pounds. And then this is the crowd. Lord, he has 10 pounds. What do you think you're doing? He doesn't need it. This guy, he'd be more in need. But, it's when we take care of what God has given us, and when we nourish others with that love and grace that God has given us, we are doing the work of God. And it's just, and it's count your blessings, because we just have so many. And God isn't going to take anything away, from us, our blessings in that. He asks us to share, and as we share, we find that we are more blessed than we were before. And this last verse we look at today gives me heartache. It truly does. Listen, I'm going to read the last verse. But as for these enemies of mine who did not want me to be king over them, bring them here and slaughter them in my presence. Harsh, very harsh. But for those that don't believe in Jesus, that's what the final punishment is going to be. For those that don't want Jesus to be their Lord and Savior, the final punishment is not going to be desirable at all. It's going to be ugly. None of us wants to think for sure that so-and-so is, or that that there are people that are going to end up in that place of eternal damnation that we call hell. It would be great if I truly believed everyone would be saved, but I don't believe that because of what Jesus teaches, and because that the gospel writers tell us very clearly that there will be a place of separation from God, just like the story of the rich man dies and the poor man Lazarus, and after they both die, there's this great chasm between, of which no one can cross. There is a place of judgment. There's a place of eternal salvation and a place of eternal damnation. And as Jesus says, for those who do not want me to be king, well, we don't call Jesus king. What do we call him? Savior, loving God, holy, comforter. He is the Son of God, the Son of Man. He is the one who comes for each and every one of us. And so if or when people reject God, reject Jesus, they face this harsh punishment. And, the devil is there working all the time, trying to separate us from God and from God's love. And we have this wonderful story that we just heard last week again, Easter, the resurrection of Jesus, promise of forgiveness. And as he goes on, he comes near Bethpage of Bethany at the place called the Mount of Olives, and he sends the disciples ahead to get this donkey to ride into the Jerusalem on. And so we have this chapter ends with with the royal entry, into Jerusalem. And Jesus sees the city, and he weeps over the city of Jerusalem. And the Pharisees just couldn't stand that the crowds were cheering for Jesus. Tell them to stop. And Jesus says, if they didn't cheer, the stones themselves would cry out. Nature, creation, all of creation knows the power of God. And this chapter ends with the cleansing of the temple, with Jesus teaching in the temple, the very last verse of chapter 19. I looked a little ahead because that's tomorrow's reading. Tomorrow, Sunday morning, we have worship in Mabel and our Saviors both. But the last part of chapter 19, for the people were spellbound by what they heard. By the words of Jesus, by his teaching, by his grace, by his welcoming, they were spellbound by Jesus.